Well, let's talk about this a little more, because it's not only India that's lowered its interest rates. Let's take a look at where it stands against other countries. As we said, the Indian cut was by half a percentage point to 6.75% earlier in the day. America cut its rate to a low of 0.25% all the way back in 2008, and it hasn't gone up since that point. In Japan, the interest rate there is 0.00%, a record low, and it's been there since 1999. In Sweden, the rate was cut to minus 0.35 in July. That is minus 0.35%. But why is this the case, and what are the benefits and what are the costs of a country having a low interest rate? Let's talk about this for the next few minutes. Let's head to Delhi. Let's speak to Sunil Sinha, who's the Director of Finance and Principal Economist at India's Ratings and Research. Thank you so much for being with us. Did it come as any surprise to you to see this 0.5% cut in India today?
Well, I mean, so far as today's rate cut expectation was concerned, a 25 basis point rate cut was a given. And our view was that, if the conditions turn out to be more favorable, then a higher cut is possible. And in fact, Fed not raising the rate in its latest, monetary review committee meeting on 17th September provided that elbow room to the RBI. So RBI, instead of going for a 25 basis point cut, actually went for 50 basis point cut.
So they went for the 0.5%. I mean, it still leaves India with interest rates at 6.75%. I mean, why so much higher than so many other leading economies?
Well, if you look at the way the monetary policy is conducted across the globe, one of the most important indicator, which ultimately depends where the policy rates would lie, is what is the rate of inflation in that economy. And in India's context, the rate of inflation in the past had remained pretty high. Of course, now the trajectory of inflation is downward. As RBI is now more confident about the trajectory of inflation going forward, it has taken the step of cutting it back. But even now, if one looks at the CPI based inflation, then it is hovering around 4%, and of course WPI inflation, which is in other countries more or less known as producers price inflation, is
so it's all tied around that inflation figure. I mean, we went through a list of other countries. America, very low interest rates there. Japan at zero interest rates, and then this extraordinary experiment that's going on in Sweden with a negative interest rate. I mean, what happens when you enter that world of negative interest rates?
Well, I mean, in case of a negative interest rate, I mean, see, one of the basic premises is that the monetary policy in that particular country is supposed to raise the rate of inflation. Because of certain circumstances, the overall rate of inflation has fallen to a level where it is negative. And in that case, the investment the consumption takes a much bigger hit. So in that kind of a situation, the job of the monetary authorities is to actually prop up inflation rather than contain the inflation. And that is why the thinking
always was that actually if you ever had a negative figure, that people naturally would take the money out of the bank. They'd prefer to have cash. And yet in Sweden, it seems to have worked. So I just wonder, in terms of future global shocks, whether actually thinking has been turned on its head now about potentially what can be done.
Well, I mean, if you look across the countries, then you will find that post-2008 period has been somewhat very, very different from the earlier episodes of, a global meltdown. As a result of that, the monetary policy that one witnesses being pursued or followed in different countries across the globe is very, very unconventional in nature. And what has happened in Sweden is also part of absolutely unconventional monetary policy. And this is something which is also visible in Japan and in several other countries in Europe also, where the threat of deflation is looming large.
Well, perhaps the models are changing. Sunil, Sinha, thank you so much for being with us here on the programme. Thank you. Now, do stay with us, because bouncing back, how the humble trampoline is helping children stay out of trouble in one of Johannesburg's roughest neighbourhoods. That story in a moment.